I never imagined that a single request, made in a quiet corner of a basketball court, would unravel the life I thought I understood. At the time, it felt ordinary, just another moment in a season filled with sweat, noise, and routine. Looking back, I can see how easily something harmless can shift into something dangerous when you let your guard down. My name is Ethan Walker, and basketball had always been my escape. The court was the one place where my thoughts stayed organized, where effort led to clear results. I was dependable there, first to arrive, last to leave. My teammates trusted me, and my coach relied on my discipline. Off the court, my life appeared just as steady. I had been in a committed relationship with Lucas Miller for 3 years. Lucas was kind, patient, and thoughtful, the type of person who believed love was something you nurtured quietly over time. We shared an apartment, routines, and plans for a future that felt predictable in the best way, but predictability has a way of dulling things when you stop paying attention. That season, a new energy joined our team in the form of Ryan Cole. Ryan transferred mid-year, already carrying a reputation for raw talent. He was confident on the court, sharp in his movements, and fearless in his shots. Off the court, though, there was a restraint about him, like someone constantly editing himself. He laughed easily with others but rarely spoke about his own life. I noticed that distance because I recognized it. I had worn that same armor once that we bonded naturally through practice. Ryan often stayed late, asking questions about plays or drills. At first, our conversations were strictly basketball, strategy, conditioning, small adjustments to improve his performance. I admired his work ethic, and he respected my consistency. That mutual respect slowly turned into familiarity. One evening, after most of the team had left, Ryan approached me while I was packing my bag. His voice was quieter than usual. "Hey, Ethan, can I ask you something?" I nodded, barely looking up. "Sure." He hesitated, then exhaled. "I'm struggling a bit. Not just with basketball. I was wondering if you could help me. Maybe talk sometimes." There was nothing dramatic in his words, nothing that suggested trouble. Just a teammate asking for support. I agreed without thinking, because that's who I had always been, the reliable one, the listener. From then on, our conversations expanded. We talked during water breaks, on walks back to the parking lot, through late-night messages that started with basketball and drifted elsewhere. Ryan opened up slowly, revealing pressure from his family, the weight of expectations, and the exhaustion of pretending to be okay all the time. He never named everything he was carrying, but I could hear it in the pauses between his sentences. At home, Lucas noticed my distraction before I did. He would ask about my day, and I'd answer, but my mind would wander. I told myself it was stress, or the season wearing me down. Lucas was supportive, as always, but our conversations had grown shorter, more functional. We talked about groceries, schedules, responsibilities, rarely about feelings anymore. With Ryan, it was different. He listened closely, remembered small details, and looked at me like my words mattered. That attention felt new, even though it shouldn't have. I told myself it was just friendship, just teamwork extended beyond the court. Still, I started checking my phone more often. Still, I felt a flicker of anticipation whenever his name appeared on the screen. One night, after a long practice, Ryan thanked me for listening. "You don't treat me like I'm broken," he said. "That means more than you know." I smiled and told him he wasn't broken. And I meant it. But as I drove home afterward, a quiet unease settled in my chest. I realized I hadn't told Lucas about these conversations. Not because I was hiding something, at least, that's what I told myself, but because I didn't know how to explain why they mattered so much. That was the first moment I understood something was shifting. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough to make me uncomfortable that I went to bed beside Lucas that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering when helping someone had started to feel like crossing an invisible line, and whether I still had time to step back before it disappeared completely. What began as casual support soon developed a rhythm I hadn't intended. Ryan and I no longer spoke only after practice or during drills. Our conversations stretched into late evenings, unfolding in quiet messages sent after the rest of the world seemed asleep. At first, it felt harmless, two teammates leaning on each other through a demanding season. But gradually, those conversations became something I looked forward to more than anything else in my day. Ryan grew more open with me. He spoke about the pressure he felt to perform, about the version of himself he presented to everyone else. With me, he didn't pretend. He admitted his fears of disappointing people, his confusion about who he was becoming, and the loneliness that followed him even in crowded rooms. I listened carefully, offering reassurance, advice, and sometimes nothing more than presence. In return, he offered me the same attention, the kind that made you feel seen rather than simply heard. That I didn't notice the shift at first. It arrived quietly, disguised as concern. I started wondering how Ryan was doing before I wondered about Lucas. When my phone buzzed during dinner, my instinct was to check it immediately. If it wasn't Ryan, I felt a strange, unspoken disappointment. That realization unsettled me, but I pushed it aside, convincing myself I was overthinking. Lucas sensed the distance growing between us. He would ask if something was wrong, and I would reassure him, even as my answers became vague. I told him work and basketball were demanding more of my energy. It wasn't a lie, exactly, but it wasn't the full truth either. The more I withheld, the heavier that silence became. Ryan, on the other hand, noticed everything. He picked up on my moods, asked follow-up questions, remembered the things I mentioned in passing. One night, he told me, "You're the only person I feel comfortable talking to like this." The words settled between us, heavy with meaning. I should have set a boundary then. I should have reminded him, and myself, that closeness has limits. Instead, I thanked him for trusting me. Our connection deepened through shared vulnerability. I told Ryan things I hadn't told anyone else, about my fears of stagnation, about how life sometimes felt like a series of obligations rather than choices. He never judged me. He just listened, his responses thoughtful and gentle. The more we shared, the more exclusive our bond felt, as if we were creating a private world separate from everything else. With that exclusivity came secrecy. I began turning my phone face down when Lucas entered the room. I stepped outside to reply to messages, lowering my voice during calls. Each small act of concealment made the next one easier. I told myself I was protecting everyone involved, that no one needed to get hurt over something that wasn't physical, something I hadn't even named yet. Ryan never asked me to hide anything, but he didn't discourage it either. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a quiet agreement that what we shared belonged only to us. That understanding felt comforting and dangerous all at once. One evening, after a difficult game, Ryan lingered beside me in the empty gym. He thanked me again for being there for him, his voice steady but his eyes revealing more than his words. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said softly. That sentence stayed with me long after I left. It echoed in my mind as I drove home, as I sat beside Lucas on the couch, as I lay awake that night staring into the dark. I realized then that Ryan's dependence had become something I didn't want to lose, and that realization frightened me. That I wasn't just helping him anymore. I was choosing him, emotionally, in moments where I should have been choosing my partner. The line I had sensed earlier wasn't just blurred now, it was behind me. Still, I hesitated to call it betrayal. I clung to the idea that nothing irreversible had happened. Yet deep down, I knew that emotional intimacy carries weight. It shapes decisions. It shifts loyalties. And I had already allowed mine to drift. The season pressed on, practices growing more intense, emotions running higher. Ryan leaned on me more openly, and I let him. Lucas grew quieter, his concern turning into resignation. I watched these changes unfold, aware of my role in them, but unsure how to stop what I had set in motion. By the time I finally acknowledged the truth, it was already too late to pretend this was just friendship. I had crossed a boundary without touching it, and I knew that sooner or later, the cost of that choice would demand to be paid. The moment everything began to collapse didn't arrive with drama. It came quietly, the way truth often does, slipping into a space that silence can no longer protect. Lucas noticed first. He always did. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, he studied me with a tired familiarity that hurt more than anger ever could. "You're here," he said calmly, "but you're not with me anymore." His words weren't an accusation. They were an observation that I wanted to deny it. I wanted to promise that nothing had changed. Instead, I felt the weight of every unspoken message, every moment I had turned away from him while leaning closer to Ryan. The truth pressed against my chest, demanding to be acknowledged. Basketball became unbearable in those days. The court, once my refuge, now felt like a narrow bridge between two lives I could no longer keep separate. Ryan and I still practiced together, still communicated with the ease we had built, but something had shifted. Awareness had replaced comfort. Every glance carried meaning. Every pause felt loaded. After one particularly tense practice, Ryan followed me outside. The evening air was cool, the parking lot nearly empty. "You've been distant," he said. "Did I do something wrong?" I looked at him then, not as my teammate, not as the person who made me feel understood, but as someone deeply entangled in a choice I could no longer avoid. "We crossed a line," I said quietly. "Even if we never said it out loud." Ryan didn't argue. His silence confirmed everything. He nodded slowly, his expression clouded with regret. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," he said. "I just didn't want to feel alone." Neither did I. And yet, loneliness doesn't excuse betrayal. That realization settled heavily between us, ending whatever illusion we had been clinging to. We agreed to pull back, to rebuild boundaries we should have protected from the start. But boundaries, once broken, don't simply reappear. That night, I sat across from Lucas again, knowing I owed him honesty no matter the outcome. I told him everything, not every detail, but every truth that mattered. I admitted my emotional distance, my secrecy, the connection I had allowed to grow elsewhere. I watched his face change as understanding replaced hope. "You didn't cheat with your body," Lucas said slowly, "but you left me long before tonight." There was no shouting, no dramatic exit. Just the quiet devastation of someone realizing they had been replaced in ways that mattered most. The days that followed were defined by consequence. Lucas needed space. Ryan kept his distance, respecting the boundary we had finally named. Practices continued, but the chemistry we once shared had vanished, replaced by professionalism and restraint. The team didn't notice much, but I felt every absence sharply. In the stillness that followed, I was forced to confront myself. I had believed infidelity required a single, unmistakable act. I was wrong. It had begun with comfort, with understanding, with choosing one person's presence over another's honesty. It had grown in silence and survived on avoidance. Eventually, Lucas moved out. There were no promises about the future, only the acknowledgement that trust, once fractured, doesn't heal on a schedule. Ryan and I spoke less and less, our connection fading into something distant but respectful. What remained was accountability, and the loneliness that comes with it, yet within that loneliness was clarity. I understood now that love demands attention, boundaries, and courage. Not just to pursue what feels good, but to protect what you've already committed to. I didn't lose everything. But I lost enough to learn that integrity isn't proven in moments of temptation, it's proven in the choices you make before temptation ever has room to grow, and that lesson, earned through silence and regret, was one I would carry forward, long after the echoes of the court had faded. Time didn't rush in to fix anything. It arrived slowly, deliberate and unforgiving, forcing me to sit with the aftermath of my choices. The apartment felt larger after Lucas left, not because of the space he took with him, but because of the silence he left behind. Every room carried reminders of a life that had once felt secure, shared routines, half-finished conversations, plans that no longer belonged to anyone. I threw myself into basketball, hoping movement might quiet my thoughts. On the court, I was focused, efficient, almost mechanical. Teammates praised my discipline, unaware that it was driven less by passion and more by avoidance. Ryan and I operated with careful distance now. We spoke when necessary, nodded in passing, and kept our interactions strictly professional. What we once shared lingered beneath the surface, unspoken but unmistakable point. One evening after practice, Ryan caught up with me as I headed toward my car. He kept his tone measured, respectful. "I just wanted to say. I'm trying to figure myself out," he said. "And I needed to apologize again. Not just to you, but to myself." I appreciated his honesty. It mirrored my own internal struggle. "We both learned something," I replied. "Even if it cost more than we expected." That exchange brought a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was understanding. We had both mistaken emotional refuge for harmless connection, forgetting that refuge built on secrecy eventually collapses. Weeks passed. I spoke to Lucas occasionally, conversations brief and careful. There was no anger left between us, only a quiet acknowledgement of what had been lost. We didn't discuss reconciliation. Some breaks, I learned, are not meant to be repaired but understood. That I in that solitude, I reflected on how easily I had justified my actions. I hadn't set out to betray anyone. I hadn't intended to cause pain. Yet intention had mattered far less than impact. I had underestimated the power of emotional intimacy, the way it rewires priorities, reshapes loyalty, and dulls the urgency of honesty. That I began to see the pattern clearly. Infidelity hadn't started with Ryan. It had started when I stopped investing fully in my relationship with Lucas, when I chose comfort over communication. Ryan had simply arrived at the moment I was most vulnerable to distraction. That realization didn't absolve me, but it grounded me. It reminded me that growth often begins where self-justification ends. By the end of the season, our team stood stronger than expected. I played well, but without the ease I once felt. The game no longer shielded me from reflection. Instead, it mirrored it, every pass requiring intention, every misstep carrying consequence. On the final night of practice, I stayed behind alone, standing at center court as the lights dimmed. I thought about the man I had been at the start of the season, certain, confident, unaware of how fragile balance can be. I thought about the man I was becoming, more cautious, more honest, and painfully aware of my own capacity to hurt others. That I didn't leave with regret alone. I left with resolve. That I promised myself that the next time someone asked for help, I would offer it without losing sight of my own boundaries. That the next time love felt routine, I would lean in rather than drift away. And that the next time temptation whispered quietly, I would answer it with clarity instead of silence, because love doesn't fall apart in one moment. It erodes in the spaces where honesty should have lived, and this time, I intended to listen before it was too late.